Marketing and Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. Next slide, please. DCL Services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. Next slide, please. We serve a very broad client base. Next slide, please. Spanning all industries. Today, we are thrilled to introduce Nave Greenberg, Director, U.S. Defense Development for Data Conversion Laboratory, and a PMI certified project management professional with expertise in large-scale complex conversions utilizing numerous DTD standards. Nave specializes in conversions for DCL's defense and TechDoc business units and has been instrumental in developing DCL's DITA 2361/40051, S1000D, and 38784 conversion software suites, as well as working with clients to develop detailed project business rules. Nave is a member of the United States S1000D Management and Implementation Group, LAN Working Group, and participates in other discussion subgroups. Nave has been with DCL for over 10 years and holds a BE in Mechanical Engineering from Stony Brook University. Without further ado, welcome Nave.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today we will discuss converting your legacy data to S1000D. Even though today we are specifically talking about S1000D, most of this presentation really applies to any type of legacy conversion. So the agenda for the next 40-45 minutes will cover a very quick introduction to S1000D. We will continue with a discussion on what are the technical headaches you have to deal with when converting to S1000D. This will lead us to the question we always hear, should I convert or should I just rewrite the entire data? And here is a spoiler alert. If the answer to the question is not a definite rewrite, we will discuss how do we plan for a successful conversion. Another item we'll cover is the timeline. And finally, discuss some tools and procedures that could help you achieve your conversion goals. So let's start with a very short introduction to S1000D. There's a lot of movement toward S1000D in many industries. It started especially in aviation, but you see it picking up in other industries. There are many benefits to go to S1000D. First, it provides an international standard. Today, everything is global, and product information and data in general are exchanged at a global level. It was also developed from ATA Spec 100 to place a greater emphasis on granularity and interchangeability of information, which is very important, and that does lead to the next benefit, that it allows modularization of content with data module, and for easy reuse in multiple outputs. You don't need to create separate XML files for different output. You can reuse the same data module in multiple publications. The standard and the schema are publicly available and continuously maintained. It's an active standard body that keeps up with evolving technologies and maintains the standard, making sure it's up to date. Another big benefit is applicability. Applicability is available at a very fine level. It gives you the ability to allow minor changes to the document to cover multiple models, conditions, location, or other items without duplicating the entire data module or worse, the entire publication. S1000D even standardized the way to exchange data. this allows you to share data with anyone. There are other features such as process DM to allow interactive processing structure or learning DM for training. There are many other benefits and features that can easily be a separate webinar. But one thing for sure is that all of this feature is what makes the conversion more challenging. So what makes S1000D conversion more difficult than others? S1000D is a conceptual departure from linear information and is difficult for many to get used to. People are used to chapter, section, subsection, paragraph, and subparagraphs. Basically a visual breakdown of your data. If you take the Black Book standard or the 38784 standard, you tag the data according to structure, not content. You know something is a chapter, but that's really it. There are some variation of 38784 where you can tag some data according to content such as IPB, some preliminary requirement or alphabetic index, but you are still limited to what you can do. In S1000D, you actually turn the structured book or publication into a collection of data modules, and we'll discuss that a little bit later on. In S1000D, you also deal with data module code and illustration control numbers and business rules. In S1000D, even a file name actually has a meaning because you assign a data module code to it. As we already mentioned, business rules are also used. This is great because these are a set of rules that everyone must follow. However, in S1000D, you have layers of business rules. When you finally get down to the project-specific rules, if you are not careful and very specific, it can really mess up a project. In S1000D, you keep hearing about data module. Data modules can be thought as an interchangeable parts that can be reassembled in multiple ways, repurposed in multiple outputs, and reused across multiple products. This is all very important, but to get to that point is challenging. Your legacy data was not written as a collection of data modules, so a lot of planning and analysis will be needed. So on the left slide, you have a few examples of source data. Source data can be in many formats. Legacy data will look a lot different than S1000D should look like. Even if it was written to some standard like 38784 again, it is not in modular format. Other formats may be a better start, but it's still not the same as S1000D. Even standards that do modularize the data, like the Army 40051 or the Navy 3001, will still need some manipulation before going to S1000D. Source data can even be an earlier version of S1000D. The data module, you may not need the same amount of work to go to issue 4.1 as other standards, but you will, if you want to use applicability or process DM, it will add to the complexity. So what this slide actually shows us is that once you convert your legacy data to S1000D, the data modules can be hosted in a common source database. You can then use publication module to construct any kind of publication you may need, and hence create once, use many that you keep hearing when converting to S1000D. All of this looks nice in a picture, but getting from here to here is not very, very simple. So when converting to S1000D, you're dealing with your usual conversion issues. For example, how do you assure the text is not dropped during conversion? Tables is another issue, and it's, there's issues with tables regardless of what standards you're going to. You have to make sure the table structure is valid and text appears in the correct entries. You're dealing with spanning, with row separation, with call set, with vertical and horizontal alignment. You have to make sure that all of it looks good. Also, what do you do with math equations? In S1000D, you don't have support for MathML, so you need to determine what to do with them. It would be nice to convert and link to them externally, but another option could be to convert them to images, raster or vector images, depending on your budget. There are many other typical issues like special characters and typos that you will need to address, but that's not really the main focus of this webinar. We can easily spend a full webinar just discussing the typical conversion challenges. When converting to S1000D, you have additional complexities. In S1000D, you have to deal with data module and possibly applicability. Now, it's easy to determine what is a chapter or a section. It's not always easy to determine what's a data module. It's even more difficult to determine what type of a data module we're dealing with, and assigning a data module code is also not a trivial task. Another complexity is how to determine what is a reusable data. A paragraph can be reused, but if it's part of a DM, you can't easily reuse it unless it becomes a standalone data module. It doesn't always make sense to chunk every little chunk of data to data module. When you limit it to budget, time, and resources, you need to be logical when determining what to reuse. So let's move to another complexity, which is a big one. Applicability is a powerful thing to have, but it does require analysis and planning, and therefore a lot of time to implement it. And the last complexity I will discuss is human factor. You always have to add the human factor. Going to S1000D does require you to think differently. Some people are up to the challenge while others are reluctant. People that are reluctant will always find reason why not to go to S1000D. You will hear it's too complicated, or if it's not broken, don't fix it. Another reason why not to go to S1000D. They will probably not be eager to assist in determining what data module needs authoring or getting used to the new S1000 look and feel. In S1000D, as we said before, there are a lot of business rules, and the specs cover a lot of items that you may not need. Even after determining what rules you need, it's difficult to have everyone on the same page. You can have 5 people read the same rule and have all 5 understand it differently. However, the sooner you get everyone agree and understand on the rules, the better off you will be. So we discussed already how your data was not written to S1000D. You may have data that was written to a standard that uses granularity such as ATA, DTA, and 40051, but they're still not an exact match. So there's no magic way to just read the spec or look at the famous bike sample and say, oh, now I get it, and start mapping your data to S1000D. To some extent, you need to fit square pegs into holes. So let's discuss some of the square pegs and see how we deal with them. Procedures are usually easy to detect. However, throughout the years, we saw many different ways procedures were written. You may have steps that was done as bullet lists, or first hierarchy steps that are actually the title of procedures, and the sub-steps are actually the steps. This slide shows one popular way procedures were done. You can see that in the first column you have the step label, and while in the second column are the steps themselves. If it's always done this way, it's not a major issue. You can have a conversion scripts that breaks the table or to a set of steps, or you can have a process of cleaning your data before conversion and making them tables and making them procedures. You can change this table to steps, and in some cases the table has span cell that may indicate a title of a new procedure, or there could be another column to indicate a set of sub-steps. Knowing you have these types or any other types of odd-looking structure before conversion will allow you to develop a plan to convert them properly. You can create conversion rules that are done automatically or restructure your data before conversion. So here we see an example of how legacy data was not written having data module in mind. In this case, you have multiple data modules. You could have multiple data modules. And really the square should be a little bit up. But you know, these two titles, the remove XYZ module and insert replacement XYZ module, could be two separate data modules. You could extract the titles to a DM array and mark them as a procedural data module. Another option could be tagging these titles as steps and the numbered steps as the nested steps. You also need to determine what to do with the text preceding these two procedures. If you tag the two titles below as steps, then the section replacing an XYZ module becomes the procedural data module. If you do tag these titles as two separate data modules, then you can make the section replacing an XYZ module and its paragraph a potential descriptive or procedural data module. And in the publication module, you will set the hierarchy accordingly. Now this is all fine, but you will always find the cases that are a bit more complicated. But regardless, you will need to think about these cases before you start converting your entire data set. So in this slide, you have paragraph 1-1, which leads to two or more procedures. Sorry. If you do not set up conversion rules properly, you will end up with paragraph 1-1 tagged as possibly a descriptive data module, and paragraphs 1-2 and 1-3 as candidate for procedural data module. Some people may be fine with it. Some may fix it after conversion, and others may restructure the files before conversion. If this happens only a few times, manually fixing it is fine. However, if this happens many times, the rule of thumb is that it's always easier, faster, and probably more accurate to fix it before conversion. You also have to develop a conversion rule dealing with the warning. If you tag the warning with paragraph 1-1, then paragraph 1-2 and 1-3 will not have this warning associated with them. You can obviously automate a rule that the subparagraphs will inherit this warning, but this is not a very simple rule to implement. An automated rule cannot know when to stop or start applying the warning. A simple solution can be to insert links, to insert clues to tell the software when to start and when to stop inserting the warnings. You can do something similar with the personnel recommended, but here the rule can be easily automated. If you notice, the second column refers to paragraph numbers. You will need to make sure this rule applies to all other places. If not, you will need to normalize the data before conversion or add more conversion rules. In most cases, when you go to XML, you basically eliminate the concept of pages. If you want, you can still produce output with pages, but it's usually generated externally. You don't physically tag the page numbers or the page breaks. In standards such as S1000D, and in cases where an item are used, the entire concept of page really goes away. In this specific example, once you go to S1000D, there's no more Chapter 1, and there's definitely no more Page 2. Chapter 1 probably became a data module or a set of data module, so the question is, where do you link to? This is something you need to try to define at the beginning of the process. You may link to the first data module of what used to be Chapter 1, or you can have a subject matter expert determine what data module is best suited to be linked to. Now, a sophisticated conversion software or customized conversion software can find a specific page if there's a real clear rule to determine where a page starts and when it ends. If your legacy data was PDF or Microsoft Word, then the page breaks can be used to let the software know what page you're in. So if in your legacy data you have a case like refer to the installation procedure on page 3-2, a customized software can actually go to the chunk of the data that appears in what used to be page 3-2 and look for a title, let's say, with keyword installation. But this is a little bit risky. And the question is it worth investing the time to develop this customized software to cover these cases or fix them manually? You do need to find the right balance between automation and manual cleanup. On one hand, computers cannot understand data like humans do, However, they can detect patterns and follow complicated rules a lot better than humans. Now, writer creativity is always an issue. And throughout the years, your data was created and updated by more than one writer. Even if you had a limited number of writers, they surely were not always consistent. Now, to be fair, it's not necessarily their fault. To begin with, some legacy data did not follow any specific writing standards. And if it did follow any standards, there were still many ways to insert data where you shouldn't. Because in the past most publications were printed, writers had to find shortcuts to save on pages. So it's very difficult to restrict writers if the authoring tool is not tied to a schema that restricts them. Even if the authoring was done in HTML or XML, if the DTD and schema were not robust, writers could always find a way to present the same data in different ways. So in the first example on this slide, you can see 4 different ways to represent the same data. Now really, the only option should be tagging data steps. In the next example, you see the steps that were done as bullets. If you're not careful, or some don't really care, this could be tagged as a random list instead of steps. In the last example, shows a situation when sometimes what used to work in your legacy data does not work in S1000D. In your legacy data, it was okay to insert the alternate part number after item 21 with a note that this attaching part actually belongs to all items between 19 and 21. This is fine in paper output, but in an item or an interactive electronic technical manual, you do have to tag this alternate part number for each of this part number. So here is another example where possibly the writer wanted to represent an alternate part number. The other cases where an alternate part number will just be represented by the word alternate in parentheses, or just the letters AP, or any other ways to represent an alternative part number. If you review data before conversion and pick up all, or at a minimum most of this variation, the less cleanup you will have after the conversion. And in the second example, show how visually the data looks like a table. Now, if the source is paper or PDF image, all you have to do is zone it as a table or extract the data and fix it as a table. However, sometimes the source is electronic format, and it could be Microsoft Word, InDesign, FrameMaker, or, the tables do appear as a table, but they're actually either tab data, or worse, they're just separated with spaces to give the appearance of a table. Now you will need to convert this to physical table, and that way it will be easier to convert into XML, and you will have less cleanup after conversion. So we finally come to the question, should I bother with conversion or just rewrite the entire data set? There are a few reasons why people may give you to justify rewrite instead of conversion. Now they simply think it's just a pain, and they don't want to make the investment of dealing with all the anomalies. It's always difficult to go back and to things that were written years ago and with no real structure and truly understand what the writer tried to do with that data. Another reason is that there are just too many different rules to implement in order to cover all the issues. And another issue they give is that some rewriting is needed anyway, so might as well rewrite everything. And one of the most popular reasons that we keep hearing is, well, my writers are not very busy, so might as well give them something to do, or every day my writers will spend 2 or 3 hours and we should be done at a reasonable date. And I will show you later why this is not really a valid point. So it's true that rewriting resolve some of the issues, however, you still must fulfill the standard requirements. It can take a very long time to accomplish this. If you take 5,000 pages as an example, and let's estimate it takes an average of 15 minutes to rewrite a page, and I might be even underestimating here, This translates to 75,000 minutes, which are 1,250 hours. And let's continue to pretend that they write continuously for 7 hours. With no breaks, it will still take one writer 179 days to complete this task. So even if you have 10 writers, you might be able to complete this task in about a month, maybe even less if you force them to work over the weekends. However, the real problem doesn't lie with time. The bigger problem is that it will have inconsistencies and, again, writer creativity issues. You're not going to be as sharp at 4 p.m. like you were at 9 p.m. So surely there will be some inconsistencies. So throwing what you have and in a way starting all over is an expensive option. If we assume US rate, you're easily dealing with $25 to $45 to rewrite a page. If you are rewriting pages requiring high level of expertise, you can easily get to a much higher price. The hidden costs are in the items you tend not to think about. Writing the data is probably the easier task. The real cost is in indexing, cross-references, and dealing with content data. After rewriting, you also need to review and recertify the data. That can easily add a few minutes a page. It's usually easy to use what you already have as a base and convert, but that does require planning, and I will cover that in the next slide. So even though rewriting may be needed in some cases, conversion is the way to go. So now we are ready to move into conversion. In the next few slides, we'll answer some of the questions such as which content you will need to convert, which content is worth converting, which content is suitable for reuse in multiple places, what tools are available, and how to specify the conversion to get it right, and when do you start planning for conversion. Answer to all these questions will improve your chances to have a successful conversion. So if we're really talking about reuse, a quote we always recycle, and it's almost in all of our presentation, is by President Lincoln. And he said, if I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 sharpening my axe. This best describes how you should approach conversion. Planning is crucial for the success of a project. There are many reasons why people rush into conversion with no proper planning and analysis. One major reason why conversion fails is because of the lack of planning. So how do we plan for conversion? First, you need to ask the right questions. Who are the stakeholders? And especially who is going to be the final user? And a stakeholder is anyone who is involved in the project. Besides you, it's the management, it's the graphic team, it's all the editors and all the XML experts, and the list goes on for a while. They all need to be involved and in sync. So the sooner you identify them, the sooner things will move forward. The next questions are, what is the estimated value and what is the deadline? Your plan will obviously be different if you need to convert 100 pages or 100,000 pages. The larger the volume, the more you need to depend on automation. You will probably also need more resources. You will also be able to set expectation. If you need to convert 100,000 pages and the deadline is unrealistic, you will know it now and not later when it's too late. The next question is what version of S1000D to use. If you want applicability, process DM, and other features, you will need to go to a newer version. Now, in some version, you may have known issues. For example, in one of the versions, you couldn't use more than one emphasis in a paragraph. If you need to use formatting more than once in a paragraph, for example, a bold followed by underline and then italic, it wasn't going to be possible. This leads us to figuring out what content management system or rendering tool should be used. Some tools may require specific attributes or tagging structure that others won't. Some tools are more expensive while the others are cheaper. Some offer you less while the others offer you more. If you don't need all the bells and whistles, don't get the most expensive one. But regardless, this is still a big portion of your budget, so a lot of thought should go into choosing the right tool. The source data format is very important to know. And not all source data are obviously the same, but they all have pros and cons. For example, if your source data is paper, you will need to take into account scanning, OCR, cleanup, and file preparation before you start converting to S1000D. And this translates to more time and money, but it does allow you to manipulate, restructure, and clean the source data before conversion in a more familiar environment. Source data in electronic format will save you time. You do not need to OCR and do major cleanup, but again, not all electronic formats are the same. For example, HTML or structure FrameMaker in most cases will be easier to process than InDesign and PageMaker. You may want to rely on paragraph styles in electronic format and map them to map your data to S1000D, but the styles are not always used consistently, so you can't just blindly rely on them. For example, a title might be done as bold text and not styled as a heading style. So it looks like a title, but it's not styled as a title. And obviously budget is an important thing to know. The more you have, probably the better off you have. Having a budget to make all the images vectorized is a nice thing to have, or having a subject matter expert review every kind of mapping that you do is also a nice thing to have, but it costs a lot of money. Now, one thing you can do is ask people who did similar conversion for an advice. I think if you join an S1000D discussion group, it's possible that the members here in the group share the same or similar challenges that you have. And in that environment, I think people are more willing to give up information. And you can also attend classes and learn about case studies and how S1000 can and should be implemented. So now we're ready to move to the next step, and if possible, try to get all the source data up front. You can start looking for any inconsistency and variation, and the more you have, the more accurate your analysis will be. And also try to get the business rule and all the schemas that you will need anyway before conversion. Next, start thinking about building your team. You or someone in your team should be comfortable with S1000D. You do not need to be an expert, but you should start learning the main concept of S1000D. And by understanding the concept of S1000D, you'll be able to make logical decisions when during analysis and when you develop the project-specific business rules. And another issue is QA and training, and because your data was not written to S1000D, it will probably not always fit the standard, and your output will not look the same as your source data, and you will need to explain why things look differently. So how do you go about deciding what data you should convert or in what order? Definitely categorize your data. Some categories you can use are active documents that are in good shape, active documents that need a lot of work, some inactive documents that will likely be retired, and archival material which you're basically never going to use. And you should also prioritize your data. Documents that are mostly used and documents that are, let's say, customer favorites should be set higher priority. Documents with longer product life are also candidate to be high on the priority list. Once you create your priority list, start with the most recent higher priority documents, and then go back as much as the budget allows you and start converting also the lower priority documents. At this point, you need to determine the conversion process and ask yourself, can anything be converted as is? Meaning, can you map everything to S1000D? And now, this can probably be done using a lot of rules, but once all the mapping rules were implemented, cleaning up the converted XML file should be minimal. In addition to the rules, you also need to do some preliminary work on the files. An example is to indicate an introductory paragraph or an alert that belongs to numerous data module. you will probably also need to rewrite some of the data in order to fit to S1000D, especially in cases when something is required by the standard and is missing in your legacy data. You can also determine that some data is now worth converting. You may just want to keep archival copy, but if you still want to have access to them from your converted data, you can create descriptive data module and link to them as external files. So what should a conversion process look like? Here is an example of a typical conversion process people use, and in our opinion, this is not the ideal process, and I'll explain later why. But this process usually follows 6 stages. Now you start with a pilot, and in many cases it's either too small or not fully representative of your data. Then you select your common source database and other technologies, and then you do implementation of the pilot, and then you do the conversion because, from one end you don't want to start too late or too early, so you think that's the ideal place to start your conversion. And then once conversion is done, then you think it's a good time to start training. And only then you really deal with the cleanup, with the post-conversion cleanup. And a lot of time conversion of legacy data is really an afterthought. And this is why many end up with a lot of cleanup after the system is up and running. Now, I do not believe there were many large S1000D legacy conversion to the latest version of S1000D. And by large, I mean full system, 100,000 pages, and so on. But so there's not real exact metrics to know how long something should be implemented in S1000D. If you take just Vita as an example, I mean, it is similar to S1000D in that it's topic-based, but it's easier to implement than S1000D. And on average, 2 to 3 years has been a typical time for Vita implementation, with another a year, maybe 2, to really get it going, meaning dealing with reuse and sustainment and so on. And as you said, Vita is topic-based, but is not as content-driven as S1000D. So S1000D will take a bit longer. So how do we make sure it doesn't take many years to implement a conversion to S1000D? Now, a more efficient way to go is by doing some steps in parallel. Now, instead of doing them in one string, parallel the processes. You should start preparing your documents well before you're ready for conversion. And what I mean by preparing your documents is to go through your documentation, see which documents can be used as is, and which needs some touch-up before conversion. That will help you getting to the conversion phase better ready and have conversion process highly automated. There's no reason also why initial training cannot start before conversion. And during the training, you can train your writers on S1000D, or train them on on what to expect when going to S1000D. And you can also train your writers on how the data will look like as a collection of data modules. And more importantly, how to sustain and maintain the data modules and update them. The training is very important because many people have really difficult time moving away from structured data and dealing with data modules. Now, the pre-conversion cleanup can be done regardless of what common source database you use. And also after conversion begins, you can start moving into post-conversion cleanup and do a refresher training to get your team up to speed. The refresher training is really more about how to work with the data modules. And at this point, at least they have some knowledge of S1000D, so training would hopefully be a little bit easier. So by doing this processing, this parallel approach, the implementation cycle can be cut down. So now we finally get into conversion. So what are some tools that really can help you during conversion to S1000D? And we will talk about some of them in the next few slides, at least the first 3. But some of the tools are conversion specification, and the conversion specification is a formal process in a document to specify the conversion rules so that all the stakeholders can agree on a proper process. You can think of it sort of as a project-specific rules, but again, I will elaborate it on the next slide. The DMRL, aka Data Module Requirement List, is used to verify data module have been properly identified and is a must in S1000D conversion. And I also will elaborate on that in the next slide. And content reuse identification is a software or process to locate potentially reusable content. And best practices scanner is another helpful tool that can be used to verify that best practices has been followed. You can include here the Brex checker, the QC software, or people that really the only job is to perform audits on the process. And obviously test conversion into S1000D. And I used to make sure that the process works all the way through. And obviously a pilot conversion or limited production run are example of testing the process. So I don't know, this is a little bit small and I don't know if you really can see, but a conversion specification is really a guide. And it governs the tagging rules of a conversion process. And some of the items that are covered in at least in our conversion specification is what elements are found in your documents and that will find you an analysis, and example of where these elements were found within the document, a concrete rule as to how these elements are identified, and we also include a sample of the tagging that we'll use for this element. And the last column is where we list all the open items that are connected with that element. For example, let's say we saw more than one way to determine how a procedure is made, or what to do with warning before a procedure, or how to deal with stuff. Anything that we're not 100% sure of, an open item, we list in the last column and discuss it with the client. And to some extent, conversion specification, as I said before, is a very detailed project-specific rules. And the more time you spend on it and implement it, the less cleanup you will have later on. And by having a conversion specification document, all the stakeholders can be on the same page. So that's actually a good segue to a DMRL. The DMRL is in some way a conversion specification document, but really at a higher level. So you can see here an example of how legacy data, and that's a very vague example, but how legacy data was mapped to data modules. And the data module requirement list serves really few purposes. First, it's used to identify the required data module for the project. It's where you can assign data module codes. You can also assign other important information, for example, information in the ID status section, or new values for tech name, or any kind of specific rules. You can also add any kind of really specific information, for example, state that an alert can or should be repeated in numerous data modules, and it's really, you can add any kind of unique information per data module. And what we do is extract all the title to a spreadsheet in an automated fashion, and the spreadsheet is what the subject matter expert use to review if the mapping makes sense, and assign data module codes and make any comments. So you see how the data is mapped before you really do the conversion. So that's very, very important. So you can resolve a lot of issues before you really even do the conversion. Another tool that can be used for helping in determining the content reuse. The idea with content reuse is that every time something is used, pull it once and convert it once. The problem that it can be used everywhere in the document, and people are not sure exactly where all these caches are located. Even though everyone is talking about content reuse, very few people actually use content reuse for any great extent, because it is difficult to do. And another problem is that over the time, people have taken the same paragraph and made minor modification to it, And if they were exactly the same, it would be a little bit easier to find this paragraph. Some paragraphs are worded too different, and in some paragraphs maybe a punctuation was not used or grammar was off. So one tool that we developed does an analysis report that goes through a collection of materials and identifies all the paragraphs that are similar to each other. And the tool can run on 100 pages or 1,000 or 100,000. So what the tool does with some algorithm is try to identify identical and similar paragraph. And in this case, it selects the base paragraph and lists all the places where an exact match is found. It also lists those one or two off cases and where they are located. And this type of analysis lets you know what kind of similarities you have. And then you can divide and conquer, because now you can go through the report, find a set of documents that are in good shape, make that your base documents. Then you can take it a step further and take other documents against those base set of documents, go back and adjust these documents. And by the time you're ready for full conversion, you will have a set of sections that are identical, and that can be pulled out and not converted more than once. So here's just a snapshot of the report produced by the automated tool. In the first example, you see that there was an exact match of base paragraph in 3 other manuals. You can review that section and see if you can create maybe a data module and reuse it 3 times. Now what the tool also gives us is sequential paragraphs that are the same. So let's say if it finds 2, 3, 4 paragraphs right after the other that appears somewhere else, that can really constitute a reusable data. Now, in the second example, there isn't an exact match, but it's close enough to raise a flag and indicate the possibility of a data module. So as you can see, the first paragraph discusses module FD-5200, while the other paragraph is about FH5200. So in this case, you can still use the paragraph, but maybe even use applicability to distinguish between the 2 models. And another difference is that the first paragraph states seal weld should be visually inspected, while in the second paragraph you have seal weld shall be inspected. So the word visually is missing. And this could be a typo, and even if it's not, it's still something that you can use this paragraph and maybe use applicability to distinguish between the visual. So you can use it also not only as determining your content reuse possibility, but you can use it also to normalize your data and to find any kind of typos, possible typos. So to summarize the past 40 minutes, conversion of legacy data to S1000D is not trivial. Now, it is, however, faster, safer, and less expensive than rewriting. There are also special S1000D considerations that needs to be taken into account that are covered, that we did cover at the beginning of the webinar. And you definitely need a lot of planning and analysis before jumping into conversion. We also discussed that starting the conversion process earlier makes it a lot easier. If you shift the critical path, you'll speed up the process. And I'm not sure if we covered that, but most of the time, the work of the rewrite should be done by the content owners, as they know the data best. And also by starting the conversion process earlier, it will ease the training and change the acceptance burdens. We also saw that content reuse also need planning. Starting early will allow time for more thorough review, and setting up collaboration teams set up the tone and allows one to divide and conquer. So okay, I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and Adam, it's all yours.
Thank you, Nave. A very informative webinar indeed. We've had several questions that have come in, and the first one being, is the process different if you have multiple source formats?
I think the initial process is different. I mean, what we try to do is kind of normalize, get to a common format. Now, so let's say if your format is paper, OCR, obviously there are steps that you need to do different initially if your data is HTML and XML. So what we try to do is bring everything to a common place. So let's say if you have paper, or if you have Word, or if you have FrameMaker, and in electronic you have the styles that can be used, you have formatting, you have cross-references maybe already inserted, that makes your life a little bit easier than paper, but at some point you reach a common format where you map your data, whatever's in your data, to data module. You break it to data module and then assign data module code to it. So the beginning, yes, the process is different, but you try to get to a common format at some point to make it easier.
Great, thank you, Nave. The next question that has come in is, what is the process for dealing with data that is missing in the source but is required by the standard?
Okay. Well, any kind of missing data, and it's obviously when we do conversion, we're obviously not subject matter experts, and we can insert any kind of, if let's say you need all the preliminary requirements before you do a procedure, how many people, what kind of tools, you do need either a subject matter expert or the writers or anybody who is familiar with that procedure to fill in the blank. And again, this is actually an example of where if the source data is something you can manipulate before, you can have a process that, okay, you extract all the data to Microsoft Word, and you can give that format to a subject matter expert, and they can either pull in all the data, highlight any kind of tools, and then you can automate your process to pick up those kind of missing information.
Great, thank you, Nave. The next question that has come in is, how is the review process normally handled? By data modules, or is the content review done by complete documents?
Well, I mean, the review, and again, and that's why it's so important when all the work up front to kind of track the data where it went to. You can't go and take your initial publication that, let's say, was written to chapters and sections and look at your converted data and say, wait, I don't see chapter 3 and I don't see that introductory paragraph, or I see this paragraph appears 30 times, and even though you see text repeated 30 times, it could be the same data module just being pulled, converted once and pulled many times, because the data module has to be standalone and have the minimal data to make it standalone. Whoever reviews the data needs to be aware of the structure. Now you have two ways or two locations where you do review. One of them is even before conversion, that's why you have your data module requirement list, is that you know exactly where each data is going to be located at some point. So you know that this paragraph, that used to be paragraph 3-5-3, became this data module, or became part of a different data, or became something, a standalone chunk of information. Once you know that, when you do the review, you review the body of the data module. So your first initial review is done up front before the conversion is done. And then after the conversion is done, you check two things. Number one, if the conversion was done properly and the data appears in the new data module that you know ahead of time what it's going to be. And the second thing is to make sure that all the S1000D requirements were fulfilled. So there's two places where you check the conversion process.
Excellent, thank you, Nave. The next and looks like the last question at this time that's come in is, if rewriting is needed, who is certified in your team to do so?
Okay, so I did mention that before, is that we are far from being expert on the data. I mean, we definitely know conversion. So we know when something is missing, if let's say you look at all and we discuss the preliminary requirement, or let's say if you do an IPD, we say, well, the cage code is missing, or or some of the data is missing. We just flag it as missing. We will never add any data, and anything that is missing or extra or needs attention goes to the subject matter expert or the expert or the writer, and we do not make those changes. But one thing that I do want to distinguish is between restructuring the data and rewriting the data. So restructuring, for example, is taking a table, the procedure example, for example. If you take a table that has a set of steps, you restructure the data. Instead of being in a table format, you do it as a procedure format. So that's type of restructuring that I consider is kind of valid for us to do. And again, all of these cases are being flagged and mentioned in the conversion specification. Nothing new. If let's say you write a conversion specification and everything we agreed, and we say, okay, everything inside the table, any warning inside the table that appears before a procedure, you don't tag it as a table, you tag it as a warning, or any kind of table with 3 columns that lists step, procedure, and sub-steps, we break it apart. So everything is agreed upon before we restructure the data. Any kind of new requirement or any kind of new example that is seen in the conversion, because again, there's no way you're going to cover 100% of the cases before. But you try to get to a point where most of the cases are found and agreed upon how you deal with them before conversion. So if during the conversion you hit something new, that's already a flag saying, well, this doesn't fit anything, go back and check with the point of content, whether it's the SME or the program lead or whatever, to inform them about these anomalies.
Okay, thank you, Nave. One question that just came in is, how do you determine what a data module should be as it relates to the document?
Well, and again, this is why planning and analysis is critical, because you can take the same document and have different clients do the mapping, and I guarantee it's not going to be the same. So a lot of people will go down to the very lower level and get to the sub paragraph and make them a data module. Some will not. Some will say, okay, because my legacy data was not even written close enough to data module, let me get the data to S1000D, and my data module is going to be, in most cases, what used to be called the para zero, let's say, or sub power 1, any kind of chunk of data as a starting point. And if you don't do that, then you do need some rewriting. If you need to break like a set of paragraphs to multiple data module, most probably it will require some sort of rewrite or restructure, and everything needs some introductory, some the ID status information, a new title. You can't just break everything like that. So it really depends on what the final goal of the project is. But the process that is the same to any kind of project is that before conversion, you must have a data module requirement list that says, okay, this title becomes your data module. Now you could set rules that says, okay, this data module, every paragraph will become a data module, and don't put a title now, we'll do it after the fact. And that's part of your post-conversion cleanup. But it's always done before the conversion. And that's the kind of the benefits in some way of the data module requirement, one of the benefits.
Thank you, Nave. A follow-up or a similar type question is, how are the business rules used to check the data modules? Is this done manually?
How they're done manually?
I'll repeat the question. How are the business rules used to check the data modules? Is this done manually?
No. Well, it's a trick question. It's done. Some stuff has to be done manually, and some stuff has to be done, by a Brex checker, which is a business rule checker. So let's say if your business rule says you only allow, let's say a project-specific business rule tells you you're only allowed to use two sub-steps in a procedure. So you're not allowed to have more than sub-step. Or let's say, when linking to a figure, use a specific attribute, or any kind of a business rule that is a definite rule. There's no reason why not to do it by a tool, by an automated tool. If the rule says, if you need to visually look at the graphics to make sure I don't know, stuff like that, then if it's a visual, obviously you cannot develop a tool to check it. And some of it, even though you can develop a tool, may not, will not justify the time invested. If somebody just looks at the data and says, oh, okay, that's good, then that's a rule that's done manually. But you do have the whole concept of the breaks or business rule checker that is done via an XML file.
Thank you, Nave. Another question has come in is, does S1000D use a standard XML table model?
Yes, so we use the Oasis, the COWS tables, so-called. Obviously, there's some content tables, stuff like, that looks like a table but are tagged in content-driven. But yes, it use the COWS table format.
Okay, thank you. And another question that's just come in is, so using S1000D requires that you develop tools. Is there a BREX checker available?
Yeah, there are, but when you're dealing with project-specific business rules, because in S1000D you have all kind of layered business, and at some point you get to a project-specific. So a lot of times the business rule at a higher level will tell you, well, the project is going to determine how many levels of step or how many level of leveled paragraph you allowed. So some of the rules are being left to at the project-specific level, and it's not very difficult to develop a BREX checker. It's not our main core of business, but yes, there's always companies out there that's really the task to do, and if it's simple enough, you can do it. You can do it yourself, but there are tools out there. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Nave. That's all the questions we've had, and thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. This will conclude today's broadcast. You'll be able to access the recorded version of this webinar in the archive section of our website located at www.dclab.com. Tomorrow you'll be receiving an email with a link to view the webinar at our website as well. Our next webinar will be next Wednesday, April 1st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, titled New Directions 2015, Changes in Content Best Practices, presented by Joanne T. Hackos, Director of the Center for Information Development Management. Thank you again, everybody, for attending, and have a great day.